Famous people who passed away in 1770. Before we proceed, please subscribe to our channel to support us. Christopher Tuggs. He was born in 1723 and he died in March 1770. His age was 47 at the time of his death and he was killed in action. He was an American whaler, sailor, and stevedore of African and Native American descent, who is traditionally regarded as the first person killed in the Boston Massacre and as a result, the first American killed in the American Revolution. Edward Antill. He was born in June 1701 and he died in August 1770. His age was 69 at the time of his death and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a colonial plantation owner, attorney, and early politician in the province of New Jersey. His early work in cultivating grapes and producing wine received an award of the Royal Society of Arts and makes him among the earliest winemakers in Britain's North American colonies. Benning Wentworth. He was born in July 1696 and he died in October 1770. His age was 74 at the time of his death and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was an American merchant, landowner, and colonial administrator who served as the governor of New Hampshire from 1741 to 1766. He is best known for issuing several land grants in territories claimed by the province of New Hampshire west of Connecticut River, while serving as a governor, which led to disputes with the neighboring province of New York and the eventual establishment of Vermont. Carl Gustav Tessin. He was born in September 1695 and he died in January 1770. His age was 74 at the time of his death and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a Swedish count and politician and son of architect Nicodemus Tessin the Younger and Hedvig Eleonora Stenbock. He was one of the most brilliant personages of his day and the most prominent representative of French culture in Sweden. He was also often considered a fine orator. John Michael Risbach. He was born in June 1694 and he died in January 1770. His age was 75 at the time of his death and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was an 18th century Flemish sculptor who spent most of his career in England, where he was one of the foremost sculptors of monuments, architectural decorations, and portraits in the first half of the 18th century. His style combined the Flemish Baroque with classical influences. John Percival, 2nd Earl of Egmont. He was born in February 1711 and he died in December 1770. His age was 59 at the time of his death and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a British politician, political pamphleteer, and genealogist who served as the first Lord of Admiralty. He sat in both Irish and British parliaments. He was the father of the Regency era Prime Minister Spencer Perceval. Charles York. He was born in December 1722 and he died in January 1770. His age was 47 at the time of his death and he took his own life. He was a British politician who briefly served as Lord High Chancellor of Great Britain. His father was also the Lord Chancellor and he began his career as a Member of Parliament. He supported the repeal of the Stamp Act while urging the simultaneous passing of the Declaratory Act. His most important measure was Constitution, which he drew up for the province of Quebec, and which, after his resignation of office, became the Quebec Act of 1774. Charles-Jean François Renaud. He was born in February 1685 and he died in November 1770. His age was 85 at the time of his death and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a French writer and historian. His literary talent manifested in the compositions of various light poetical pieces. An opera, a tragedy, obtained his entrance to the academy. He became superintendent of the household Queen Marie Lishchinska, whose intimate friendship he had previously enjoyed. Johann Carl Philipp von Cobenzl. He was born in July 1712 and he died in January 1770. His age was 57 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was an 18th century politician. In the Habsburg monarchy, he was minister plenipotentiary of the Austrian Netherlands in Brussels under Empress Maria Theresa from 1753 until his death in 1770. George Granville. He was born in October 1712 and he died in November 1770. His age was 58 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a British Whig statesman who served as Prime Minister of Great Britain during the early reign of the younger George III. He served for only 2 years, 1763 to 1765, and attempted to solve the problem of the massive debt resulting from the 7 Years' War. Giovanni Pietro Francisco Agios de Soldanis. He was born in November 1712 and he died in January 1770. His age was 57 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a Maltese linguist, historian, and cleric from the island of Gozo. He wrote the first lexicon and systematic grammar of the Maltese language. He was the first librarian of the Bibliotheca Publica, the precursor of the National Library of Malta. Philippe Mac. He was born in February 1720 and he died in January 1770. His age was 49 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a French historian and lawyer. His brother was a chemist, Pierre-Joseph Merck. His health did not allow him to devote himself to being a lawyer to the Parlement of Paris, and so he dedicated himself to literature. He is notable for his summaries of history, known for their clarity and precision in a similar vein to the President Henno. Thomas Chatterton. He was born in November 1752 and he died in August 1770. His age was 17 at the time of his death, and he took his own life. He was an English poet whose precocious talents ended in taking his own life at the age of 17. He was an influence on the romantic artists of the period, such as Shelley, Keats, Wordsworth, and Coleridge. Giuseppe Tartini. He was born in April 1692 and he died in February 1770. His age was 77 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was gangrene. He was an Italian composer and violinist of the Baroque era, born in the Republic of Venice. Tartini was a prolific composer, composing over 100 pieces for the violin, the majority of them violin concertos. Giovanni Battista Tiepolo. He was born in March 1696 and he died in March 1770. His age was 74 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was an Italian painter and paint maker from the Republic of Venice, who painted in the Rococo style, considered an important member of the 18th century Venetian school. He was prolific and worked not only in Italy but also in Germany and Spain. José Solís Folk de Cardona. He was born in February 1716 and he died in April 1770. His age was 54 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was fever. He was a Spanish colonial administrator and viceroy of New Granada. From November 1753 to February 1761, he oversaw significant reforms in New Granada's governance. He inaugurated an era of ostentatious ceremony previously unknown in this Spanish colony. He fortified the mint, built roads, bridges, aqueducts, and established missions. He ordered the first census of the colony. Jean-Antoine Nollet, he was born in November 1700 and he died in April 1770. His age was 69 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a French clergyman and physicist who did a number of experiments with electricity and discovered osmosis. He also served as a deacon in the Catholic Church and made groundbreaking experiments in the electricity and fluid mechanics. François Bourchier, he was born in September 1703 and he died in May 1770. His age was 66 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a French painter, draftsman, and etcher who worked in the Rococo style. He is known for his idyllic and voluptuous paintings on classical themes, decorative allegories, and pastoral scenes. He was perhaps the most celebrated painter and decorative artist of the 18th century. James Stirling, he was born in May 1692 and he died in December 1770. His age was 78 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a Scottish mathematician. He was nicknamed the Venetian. He advanced the field of mathematical analysis. The Stirling numbers, Stirling permutations, and Stirling's approximation are named after him. He also proved the correctness of Isaac Newton's classification of cubic plane curves. Philip Carteret Webb, he was born in August 1702 and he died in June 1770. His age was 67 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was an English barrister involved in the 18th century antiquarian movement. He became a member of the London Society of Antiquaries in 1747. Webb was remembered as an agent of the Crown in the North Brighton scandal 1763, assisting Robert Wood to seize the papers of radical journalist John Wilkes, whose inflammatory writings had offended the king. Mark Akenside, he was born in November 1721 and he died in June 1770. His age was 48 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was an English poet and physician, known for his philosophical poetry exploring aesthetics. He was an acute and learned physician. He was admitted M.D. at the University of Cambridge in 1753, Fellow of the Royal College of Physicians in 1754, and fourth Censor in 1755. Joseph Paris de Vernet, he was born in April 1684 and he died in July 1770. His age was 86 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He played a crucial role in French military and financial administration. He became Munitioner General in 1710, acquired the tax farm for tobacco in 1714, and together with his brothers bought into the Ferme General in 1718. He was involved in a project to develop Louisiana. Thomas Robinson, 1st Baron Grantham, he was born in 1695 and he died in September 1770. His age was 75 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was stroke. He was a British diplomat and politician who sat in the House of Commons between 1727 to 1761, a key figure in the British foreign diplomacy. Robinson gained his earliest diplomatic experience in Paris. Charlotta Frolic. She was born in November 1698 and she died in July 1770. Her age was 71 at the time of her death, and the reason for her death was undisclosed. She was a Swedish writer, historian, agronomist, and poet. She sometimes used pseudonym Lotta Triven. She published poems, stories, and work about political and scientific subjects. She was the first female to be published by the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, one of Sweden's first female historians. George Whitefield. He was born in December 1714 and he died in September 1770. His age was 55 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was asthma attack. He was an English Anglican minister and preacher who was one of the founders of Methodism and the evangelical movement. He joined the Holy Club and was introduced to John and Charles Wesley, with whom he would work closely in his later ministry. Unlike the Wesleys, he embraced Calvinism. Bernhard Siegfried Albinus. He was born in February 1697 and he died in September 1770. His age was 73 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a German-born Dutch anatomist. He served as a professor of medicine at the University of Leiden. Like his father, he also published a large-format artistic atlas of human anatomy, with engravings made by Jan Wandeler. He revolutionized anatomical illustrations. John Campbell, 4th Duke of Argyll. He was born in October 1693 and he died in November 1770. His age was 77 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a Scottish military officer, Whig politician, and peer who sat in the British House of Commons from 1713 to 1761. Campbell served in the military during his tenure in Parliament, serving with honor in the Battle of Dettingen in 1743. Ignatius of Santhia. He was born in June 1686 and he died in September 1770. His age was 84 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was an Italian Roman Catholic priest and a professed member of the Order of Friars Minor Capuchin. He gained a strong reputation for the humble and austere nature of his life, in addition to the application of the Franciscan charism in his life, which served as a model for thousands. Robert Dinwiddie. He was born in 1692 and he died in July 1770. His age was 78 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a Scottish colonial administrator who served as a lieutenant governor of Virginia from 1751 to 1758. Since the governors of Virginia remained in Great Britain, he served as the de facto head of the colony of Virginia. He is credited for starting the military career of George Washington. John Manners, Marquess of Granby. He was born in January 1721 and he died in October 1770. His age was 49 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a British Army officer, politician, and nobleman. He served in the military during the Jacobite Rising of 1745 and the 7 Years' War, being subsequently rewarded with the post of Commander-in-Chief of the forces. Neri Maria Corsini. He was born in May 1685 and he died in December 1770. His age was 85 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was an Italian nobleman, Catholic priest, and cardinal, influential figure in the Catholic Church during the 18th century. He acted as a minister, plenipotentiary, to the negotiations which resulted in the Treaty of The Hague in 1720. Honsau, he was born in January 1712 and he died in September 1770. His age was 58 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a Manchu prince of the Qing dynasty. He was granted the title Prince He of the First rank in 1733. In his childhood, he was adopted and raised by the Empress Xiao Jingxian. Unlike his brothers, he chose to avoid being involved in rivalry over the succession of their father's throne. He was also known to have pretended to be crazy and feminine. Thanks for watching the video. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel.